Welcome, everyone. If you're here for a webinar on PPP Loan Forgiveness, you're in the right place. I'm Yvonne Lee. I'll be your moderator for today. We'll just do some housekeeping while we wait for people to sign in. First of all, if you can't hear me, please shut down any kind of streaming devices you have or any programs that might be taking up a lot of bandwidth, and I think should help. You can also try refreshing your browser, and if that still doesn't work, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to reach out to us. I'll help you. This webinar will be recorded, so kindly mute yourselves when the speakers are speaking, and we'll send you a copy of the recording as well as the slides tomorrow after the webinar. You will be earning an hour's worth of CLE or CPE credit for this webinar. You just need to fill in the survey inside the webinar at the end of the presentation. So please make sure you fill out that survey in entirety before you close out the window. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them using the Q&A button at the bottom, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. Does anyone have any questions so far? No? Okay, wonderful. Okay. Welcome everyone to a webinar on PPP Loan Forgiveness, what you need to know now. We're very excited to have our two speakers today. We have Tenley Karp. She's a partner and government contracts practice leader at Arnold Gold & Gregory in DC. She's assisted clients in doing business with federal government agencies, including SBA, for the past 30 years. Since March 27, 2020, when the CARES Act became law, Tenley has been advising clients on the Paycheck Protection Program. In the past 15 months, she has been interviewed more than 50 times by the Washington Business Journal and other media outlets about the ever-changing rules of PPP. Thank you, Tenley, for being with us today. We also have Robert Hoberman. He's the managing partner of the prestigious New York City accounting firm, Hoberman & Lester. Robert has been practicing for more than 30 years and is highly regarded in the accounting, banking, and law communities. His firm is a member of MGI, an international association of accounting firms. His areas of expertise encompass general accounting, real estate transactions, tax structuring, estates, and trusts, to name a few. He's lectured extensively on the CARES Act and the PPP program. His real-world experience gives him the unique ability to give you practical advice, and that makes him an invaluable part of the team. So when you need help with a complex matter, Robert is the first one to engage. It's such a pleasure to have you, Robert. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Yvonne. Much appreciated. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. The PPP program is very complicated. It started out as a simple concept, just advance money to businesses in trouble to help them cover their payroll. So far, the SBA has issued 9 different facts, frequently asked question reports, consisting of 214 pages and 527 questions with clarifications. And still, we don't have all the answers to all the questions we want. I'm going to go through the process of getting the forgiveness right now and talk about some of the forms you have to fill out. So the borrowers can apply for forgiveness at any time up to the maturity date of the loan. So up until when your loan is due. If you don't apply for forgiveness within the 10 months after the last day of the covered period, then your payments start. You have to pay interest and principal. And then it's either for anywhere from 2 to 5 years, depending upon when you took out your loan, whether it was around 1 or around 2, and your lender. So as an example, if you applied for a PPP loan on April 1 of 2020, and you received it 2 weeks later on April 15th, and you elect the 24-week covered period, then your covered period ends on September 29th, and you have until July 29th of 2021 to apply. If you had elected for an 8-week covered period, then you would have to have applied by April 9th of 2021. So you can choose anywhere between 8 and 24 weeks, and that will determine as to when the last day you can apply and still not make any payments on the loan. After the 10 months are over, the loan's automatically converted. It requires payback between 2 to 5 years of 1% interest, including accrued interest. And then you can still apply for forgiveness if you haven't already. It's just that the forgiveness, we're not sure whether it'll be the total amount of the loan, 100% of the loan, or just the amount that's outstanding at the time you apply. Again, 527 questions, and we still don't have all the answers. 60% of the money has to be used for payroll costs, 40% or less for other costs. The covered period starts on the day you receive the money, either round 1 or round 2, so you could actually have 2 different covered periods. The borrower can use the periods between 8 and 24 weeks to calculate the use of the loan proceeds, as well as the salary and full-time equivalent reductions. Generally, for most businesses, 24 weeks is better, except if you spent all the money in 8 weeks and you're going to have a problem that you let go of people after the 8 weeks but before the 24 weeks, so that your full-time equivalents or your wage reductions took effect, then you may want to have elected the 8-week period. So the first step to apply for forgiveness is contacting your bank, figuring out the right form to use, fill it out, have all the supporting documentation, and submit it. A mistake at this level could require the borrower to ultimately have to file an appeal with the OHA, and that's going to be the second part of this webinar that Tenley will cover in detail. I'm going to go through the definitions of some of these items that we just spoke about. Payroll costs are up to $100,000 of wages per employee that are not owners on an annualized basis. So for 8 weeks, it would be $15,000. For 24 weeks, $46,000. And if you go in a period in between, then it will be somewhere between $15,000 and $46,000. Again, not counting the owners, partners. The other items that go into payroll costs are tips, vacation, parental, medical or sick leave, dismissal, separation payments, hazard or incentive pay. But it does exclude payroll that you get a credit for under either the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, or the Employee Retention Credit. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Employee Retention Credit later on because there's a complex relationship between the PPP forgiveness and the ERC, the Employee Retention Credit. Additionally, it also covers for payroll costs, group health benefits, contributions to retirement plans, group life insurance, disability, dental, state and local payroll taxes. For partners, it's your Form K-1 Box 14 earnings. It's also, that is limited to a maximum of $20,833, whether you choose 8 weeks or 24 weeks. You don't get the full $46,000 of potential forgiveness for a owner partner. It's limited to $20,000, and they did that because that's the same amount of money that you use to apply for the loan in the first place. If you remember back a long time ago when you were applying for the loan, it was limited to 2.5 months of equivalent pay. So 2.5 months is a little bit over 10 weeks. That number came out to $20,833. Same owner employees, if you own more than 5% of a corporation, if you're self-employed, it's the same thing. And any payroll where the wages were used to get the employee retention credit, that's eliminated as well. So one of the questions we get fairly frequently, sole proprietor, partnership, S Corp, should they write actual checks to the owners during the covered period? The answer is yes. Form 3508 indicates that amounts must be paid to the owner, not just accrued. So you want to write yourself a check from your business account during that covered period so that you could be sure that the owner's salary will be included in the forgiveness amount. And then up to 40% of the money can be used to pay mortgage interest payments, rent for leases in effect prior to February 15th of 2020. So rent payments pursuant to a lease renewal after February 15th also qualify, but new leases don't. Utility payments, which include telephone, internet, electric, water, gas, covered operations expenditures, that was a new thing added, includes software, cloud computing, human resources, accounting needs, and covered property damage costs. They added that if there's any of your property that was damaged due to a public disturbance, that is included. Covered supplier costs, and I'm not going to read all of these things because I'm a bit limited for time, and covered worker protection expenditures. If your loan is not completely forgiven, then you have to start making payments on the unforgiven portion of your loan after the SBA remits your forgiveness amount to the bank or informs them that your bank is not entitled to forgiveness. So if all or part of your loan forgiveness is denied by the SBA, it'd be denied by your bank, denied by the SBA, then you have 30 days to start the appeals process with the OHA, and that'll be covered extensively in the second part of this webinar. The forms and the supporting documentation, there's a lot of confusion out there. So what form do I fill out? What documentation do I need to submit? Who do I give it to? So there are three different forms that the SBA has. There's a 3508S, there's a 3508EZ. I don't know why they labeled it that way. It's a bit confusing. And the 3508, which is the original form. The 3508S, almost no work to fill out the form. The 3508EZ is more work than the 3508S. I guess the S is supposed to stand for simple, and simple is supposed to be better than easy. And the 3508 is the full-blown form. But no matter which form you choose, they all ask for the following 15 things. They want to know your name, your address, your ID number, your phone number, the day you got the loan, the number of employees. Everything on these 15 questions are covered by all three forms. In addition, the 3508S, it's a one-page forgiveness form for loans up to $150,000. So this is the simplest form to fill out. It's 2 pages long. There's 4 pages of instructions. In the 2 pages, there is a signature certification page and demographic information, which is optional. So of the 2 pages, one of them is even optional. You're not required to show your calculations. And if your loan is less than $50,000, the full-time equivalent and wage reduction haircuts are waived automatically for all loans less than $50,000. So the 3508S is the easiest form to fill out. However, you're still required to have all this documentation. You're not required to submit it. You're required to have it. Your bank may have a different opinion than the SBA. Your bank may require you to submit it. It's not a requirement of the SBA. So for payroll, they want to see all the bank account information, the bank statements, the tax forms, your 941s, your state wage reporting forms, and canceled checks. For non-payroll items, the other costs, they want proof of the mortgage interest paid, a copy of your lease, copy of your utility payments. So even if you fill out the 3508S, when you don't have to submit this information, you have to have this information. And why is this important that you have this information? Because when you sign the 3508S, you have to sign the following representations and certifications as the borrower. And the first one says that you've complied with all the requirements of the PPP program. One of the requirements is that you have all of this backup paperwork. You don't have to submit it, but you have to have it. And you're also going to certify that it's all true and correct in all material aspects. So this certification is on each of the forms, but what people sometimes forget about with the 3508S is, I just fill out the form. I don't have to put all this paperwork together. You still have to have the paperwork. You don't have to submit it, but you have to have it. Going up in complexity, the 3508EZ. If your loan is more than $150,000, this is simpler than filling out the 3508. It's for borrowers who meet their special safe harbor conditions about the employee wages and the number of the full-time equivalents. So if you meet the safe harbor by not reducing the employee's wages by 25% or more, or the safe harbor for the number of employees that you still have, then this is easier than filling out the 3508. It's 4 pages long. There's 5 pages of instructions. There's a calculation form, a signature certification authorization form. Again, demographic information, which is optional. But in order to qualify this, again, you have to fit the criteria that you didn't reduce the employee's wages by more than 25%. If you did, and it's because of COVID, then you could still use this form. And then there's the big one, the 3508. This is the full-blown form. This is where you have to do all the calculations. There are supporting schedules. You have to submit all the documentation. Generally for the larger loans, more than $1 million, these are almost de facto standard. Then you have to calculate your payroll costs, your non-payroll costs. You have to show them the 60-40 rules. You have to submit all the documentation. So the 3508 is the most laborious to fill out. And depending upon your bank, they'll be the gatekeeper with how much information you actually have to submit. But regardless, no matter whether you fill out the 3508, the 3508S, or the EZ, for all the loans, you need an attestation that you've accurately provided the information. You certify that you've complied with all the PPP rules. You have to keep the records for 6 years. Your loan forgiveness can be reduced if you did reduce your number of employees or their salary by more than 25%. The loan can always be audited, and the lender has the right to ask for more information than the SBA requires. So things that would reduce your PPP forgiveness, not spending enough money on payroll costs during the covered period, decreasing your employees, failing to meet the 60% threshold. But if you do get forgiveness, or whatever you get forgiven for, it's tax-free. The IRS has issued some guidance as to this topic. It's generally deemed to be tax-free at either the time you've met all the conditions or the time when you actually get forgiveness. This is one of the areas where we haven't got an answer to the question. I believe you could show it either way. I don't think the government will particularly care. But one of the benefits of this is that the expenses that you paid with the PPP funds, those are tax deductible. So there aren't many situations in the tax code where you get tax-free income and you can use it to create a tax deduction. So this is a very limited area of the law. It doesn't happen often, and it's a real bonus to the borrowers. And the tax-free forgiveness doesn't reduce your basis. It doesn't affect your partnership capital, your S capital. However, right now there are 8 states that have already announced that they will not follow the federal tax-free treatment. If you live or do business in one of those states, then for the state purpose only, this forgiveness income will be taxable income. Or they won't let, or conversely, they won't let you deduct the expenses. One or the other, but the effect is the same either way. Other things to think about: creating the proper documentation. it's laborious. There's a ton of documents. It has to be organized. It has to be digitally submitted. Sometimes the banks have gone back, and we're seeing this recently, they go back and they've adjusted the original loan amount based on either information that they've received subsequent, or they go back and decide that they haven't received enough information prior. And if you applied for a loan of $300,000 and they come back and say, well, you should have only applied for $200,000, you can't get full forgiveness. The most you'd be able to get is $200,000. We had this situation recently with a client. We contacted the bank. They came back and they told us the reason why they did the adjustment was because the borrower didn't submit a copy of the tax return that they were looking for at the onset. And we were able to talk to the bank, and they actually unlocked their portal for the opening loan and allowed the borrower to submit the missing information, and then adjusted the amount back up to what it was supposed to be. There's a lot of conversation about the employee retention credit. It was enhanced significantly over the last act. It used to be only 50% of wages up to $10,000 per year. And now it's 50%. It's significantly more. I'm going to go on the next page. I'll go over the rules. And the rules for meeting the eligibility have been changed. It became much easier to meet the ERC credit threshold in 2021. And originally the credit 50% of wages up to $10,000, so it was worth $5,000 per employee per year if your business was off more than 50%. But the new act increased it to 70% of wages up to $10,000. That's per quarter. So now it's $7,000 per quarter instead of $5,000 per year. And the threshold, the 20% reduction, is significantly easier to meet than the 50%. So where it was limited to $5,000 in total, it is now up to $33,000 per employee. And you can retroactively apply for this. However, if you use the PPP money to pay your wages, you can't double dip on the ERC. So the idea is to maximize the ERC first by using the up to the $10,000 of wages to get the $7,000 credit per employee, and then to use the excess above that to apply for the PPP forgiveness. This requires a lot of work, but it's worth it. You get the ERC credit and the PPP forgiveness. This is a significant savings for a lot of people, but it does require a significant amount of detailed calculations per employee. I think I'm just about out of time. I want to thank everybody for putting this together, the extraordinary amount of hard work that went on with my team and Tenley's team. And I'm going to turn it back over to Yvonne to introduce Tenley again.
Hi, Tenley. You're up. Thank you, Robert.
Great. Thank you, Yvonne. Robert, that was great. We appreciate that. There are always accounting aspects and legal aspects to all of this PPP loan forgiveness stuff, and I am going to walk you through the legal aspects. And so let's get started. I thought it might be helpful for people to have a high-level view of why the loan forgiveness is taking so much time. We hear that over and over from our clients. We applied, what is taking so long? There were over almost nearly 11.8 million loans approved, and that is from both 2020 and 2021, and that's nearly $800 billion. So there are a lot of loans out there, and that's the highest level view of both years combined, nearly 12 million loans. And this is for the 2021. There were over 6 million loans approved, and that takes us to 2020 and what's really going on in terms of forgiveness. So with the $5.2 million, 5.2 million loans, not in dollars, we'll get to dollars in a minute. There are still, quite a few, 1.7 million applications not even received, but just over half have been applied for forgiveness and actually forgiven, reviewed and forgiven. So there's a long way to go. And by dollar amount, just to give you some perspective, we're talking about for the 2020 PPP alone, $521 billion, and about half of that forgiven, and $1 billion not forgiven. That's actually a good number for all of you worried about whether your loans will be forgiven. That's really a very small percentage. So I was hoping to show this for you all to take comfort in these numbers. Most of it is being forgiven. But for those of you who end up with either a partial or an entire loan that is not forgiven, I wanted to walk through what you really need to think about in terms of a timeline. And Robert covered the beginning of this particular slide, but I wanted to walk through it with you one more time, that you should check and make sure you know what the maturity date of your loan is, because that's your drop dead deadline for your loan forgiveness application. So you want to get that in before the maturity date, which could either be 2 years or 5 years. Some of you who had 2-year loans could have had them extended to 5 years, but the first thing for you to know is, what is my deadline? What is the maturity date of my loan? So the lender has 60 days from the receipt of a complete loan forgiveness to issue a decision. So that can be approval, can be in whole or part, or denial, if directed by SBA, a denial without prejudice due to a pending SBA review of the loan. We'll get into that in a little more detail in the next slide. But SBA, so you have the first 60 days sitting with your lender. SBA then has 90 days to issue their decision back to your lender. And you can request that SBA review your lender's decision if the lender's decision is to deny your loan forgiveness. That, of course, takes more time. SBA began accepting these loans about almost a year ago, and they're on a rolling basis, as you know. So what we're hearing now is, in addition to submitting your loans directly to your lender, SBA may come out by the end of the week to say that they're setting up a portal. I think they're planning to do a pilot, and they haven't told the community, the PPP community, exactly what the dollar amounts will be, but some subset, probably something like smaller loans, maybe up to $2 million, or maybe even smaller than that, might be able to apply for forgiveness directly on an SBA portal. And this might start happening with a pilot group by the end of July, and then potentially take effect for good in August. This is all yet to be seen, but I think we'll be hearing from SBA by the end of the week about the new potential way for some of the companies to get loan forgiveness. And so that, I think, would be helpful, especially because some lenders have not been responsive. And we know that even though they're supposed to have 60 days to get back to you, either they haven't gotten back to you at all, or they haven't gotten back to you with very thorough information, even anything about SBA and what SBA may have said about your loan. So this is important, hopefully important news for those of you trying to still apply for loan forgiveness. So I want to just run through the laws that govern the loan forgiveness, just so that everyone has the big picture. The PPP was originally established in the CARES Act on March 27th of 2020, and then it was extended by the Economic Aid act to hard-hit small businesses, nonprofits, and venues. We called it the Economic Aid Act. And that happened on December 27th of 2020. And the interim final rule on loan forgiveness requirements and loan procedures, which was originally published on August 10th of 2020, was amended by the Economic Aid Act on February 5th, 2021. And there are governing regulations as well. And the SBA issued an interim final rule establishing the process by which borrowers may appeal decisions relating to PPP. That doesn't mean that SBA is following those rules, which I'll get to in a minute, but there actually are regulations now that you can find in the CFR, Code of Federal Regulations. And they set them in a new subpart that is called Subpart L, and it's the rules for practice for appeals of certain SBA loan review decisions under the PPP. So it's 13 CFR 134. If you're looking for it, you can find it on the internet, and that tells you how these PPP appeals will be adjudicated before SBA's existing Office of Hearings and Appeals. So OHA is not new. OHA has been in place to hear small business appeals, whether a company is small under a NAICS code, et cetera. But now OHA is taking on this added task of determining, making decisions about your loan forgiveness. So this is the process. Robert kicked it off by saying if you receive the news that you are ineligible for a PPP loan, or you are ineligible for the loan amount received, or the used PPP loan proceeds for unauthorized users, or you were ineligible for your loan forgiveness as determined by your lender in full or partial approval decision issued to SBA, or ineligible for PPP loan forgiveness in any amount when the lender has issued a full denial decision to SBA, then you have 30 calendar days. As soon as you receive that final SBA loan review decision, which you are supposed to receive from your lender, then you have the right to appeal. Now, the problem is we know, and Robert and I have both had this experience, that not every lender has actually provided the company with that SBA loan review decision. So you need to ask and ask and keep asking. Unfortunately, even though I've asked several times for one of my clients, we've still never received the decision. We were told that SBA said no, there was a total denial, but we never received anything from the lender that came from SBA. So you have to really push for that. So if there's a lender decision to deny forgiveness in full, then they are supposed to notify you, the borrower, within 5 business days and include all the reasons that the lender concluded that you are not entitled to loan forgiveness. You are also supposed to hear from your lender that you have 30 days to seek review from SBA of the lender's decision, and that doesn't always happen either. So it's really important that you know these rules on your own, because your lender might skip certain steps. They're just completely overwhelmed, as you all know by now. And lenders that receive from borrowers requests for SBA review of a full denial of forgiveness must submit those requests to SBA through the PPP platform within 5 business days of receipt. So SBA has discretion then. They can decide whether to review. Once you request a separate review of your lender's decision, they have the discretion to decide whether to provide you with that review. And they will notify the lender if they decide to review the lender's decision or if they decline. You'll hear it through your lender. So once you've realized that you need to appeal and you are timely at OHA, you can represent yourself, or you can be represented by outside counsel like our law firm. And the standard of review by OHA for PPP loan appeals is whether the SBA loan review decision was based on clear error of fact or law. And you have the burden of proof by a preponderance of the evidence. It's really important to take heed of everything that Robert just told you so that SBA has all of the documentation up front at the time they're making their decision. It's unlikely that you're going to get this turned around by coming up with your documents after the fact and, upon appeal. And as we go to OHA, oh, I have this, I have that. It may work. We're hoping it works. But really your best chance of loan forgiveness is to have all of your documentation at the right time, have it with your loan forgiveness package and or upon request by your lender or SBA initially. Don't wait until we get to this point. It might be too late when we're on appeal. This is really just sort of your last chance. So the judge is supposed to issue a decision within 45 calendar days after the close of record. The timing is a little bit off. We will tell you that we've both had a situation where we were supposed to have received notice of acceptance of a case and the closing of record within a certain period of time from SBA, and SBA has missed that deadline. Perhaps it's just our case and it's an anomaly, but probably not. And so you have to keep an eye on the calendar, and you have to meet your deadlines, but just sort of a heads up that SBA probably isn't meeting all of theirs. I think they're a little overwhelmed, and OHA has this new task that's probably very difficult for them to keep up with. So the decision will contain findings of fact and conclusions of law, and this decision should be served on each party. This is the initial decision, and unless there's a request for review, then it will be your final decision. But you can, if you decide within 30 days, if you see something that's wrong about the decision, you can go ahead and ask for reconsideration on the initial decision. And reconsideration is an initial decision of the judge can be reconsidered. Either SBA or the appellant may request reconsideration by filing with the judge a petition for reconsideration within 10 calendar days after that initial written decision. But you must be able to show a clear error of fact or law material to the decision. And the judge may also reconsider a decision on his or her own initiative within 20 calendar days. That's probably rare too, but it may happen. They have the discretion. So the request for review is within 30 calendar days after the service of the initial decision or a reconsidered initial decision. You can file a request for review by the administrator. But in order to exhaust your administrative remedies and seek a final review from SBA, you have to do all of this. You have to go through all of the steps, the initial decision, the reconsideration, and a request for review. You have to exhaust all of these administrative remedies before you can say, we are going to go into federal district court and file our case there. So OHA may affirm, reverse, or remand an SBA loan. If they remand, what that means is OHA is sending your case back to SBA. So they will no longer weigh in on your case until SBA has looked over your case again and made potentially a new decision. They may make a new loan review decision, maybe in your favor. But that's what it means for OHA to remand your case. So some of you who've been to OHA before, you might be small businesses, government contractors, and you think if you win, if you're correct in your case, you should get your attorney's fees. And that is true in government contracts if you're small, but they decided and they set forth right in these new rules in 134.12.15 that you are not entitled, even if you are correct and have to fight for your loan forgiveness, you are not entitled to recover your attorney's fees. So that's just something to know, and to, you have to decide sort of how much you want to spend as you go forward, knowing that you won't be able to recover your attorney's fees at OHA. And as we've talked about before, an appeal to OHA, a request for review by the administrator, those are administrative remedies that must be exhausted before you decide to bring your case in a federal district court, which is even more expensive than going to OHA. And so that's another consideration, that you should look at the dollar amount of your loan. Going to OHA is actually a very inexpensive process, but it better be, your loan better be worth a lot of money, and you better have a very good argument if you're going to take it to federal district court, which is expensive. Just the complaint alone is more expensive than at OHA. And we are going to open it up now for questions. We've seen some questions come in while we've been talking, and I'm going to let Yvonne take over as the moderator to let us know what you all are hoping to hear from us.
Thank you, Tenley, and thank you, Robert. That was very informative. So if you guys have any questions or you want to share some experiences, feel free to hit that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen now to submit your text. And please stick around till the end of the presentation to fill out that survey on the right side of your screen if you want to earn CLE or CPE. All right, let's jump right into the questions. Robert, I think this question is for you about states that don't recognize the tax credit. What 8 states are you talking about?
And I'm happy to circulate the answer to this later through an email to everybody, but the 8 states are California, Nevada, Utah, Texas, Hawaii, Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, and Rhode Island.
Okay, nice, thank you. We have a question. In what ways am I allowed to spend my PPP loan?
So I'll take that one too. It's very specific. If you refer back into the earlier slides, it has to be either payroll costs or other costs, and there is an extensive definition within these slides. You could download the slides. Feel free to use them as a reference. Payroll costs are mostly wages, but they do encompass some other costs like retirement plans and benefit plans. And the other costs are mortgage interest, rent, and those are also detailed extensively in these sheets that we prepared.
Thank you. Regarding owner's compensation, if the owners are paid through payroll, so they receive a W-2, can the owners receive $46,154 over 24 weeks?
Well, you could receive $46,000, but you're limited under most circumstances. You're limited to $20,833 as to what you could use for the forgiveness calculation, which is the same amount of money you were eligible to borrow. So you do get 100% forgiveness for owner's salary. You don't get an extra kicker.
Okay, thank you. Next question, are employees that quit or resign still considered an exemption for loan forgiveness?
So if they quit or resigned because of COVID, then you can exclude them for the full-time equivalent calculation. If it wasn't COVID related, then it's used in the full-time equivalent calculation. Depending upon what threshold you meet, it may reduce the amount of forgiveness that you ultimately are qualified for. But again, this is a complicated mathematical formula because you borrow the money over 2.5 months, which is about 11 weeks. You can pick a covered period of up to 24 weeks. So even if you are limited by the full-time equivalent, you probably will still qualify for 100% forgiveness.
Thank you. Okay, next question. So if you initially got a loan on the first round, which is not available to be forgiven, and then received a loan during the second round, which is forgivable, and you use some of the funds from the second loan to pay off the first, is there any way that the funds used to pay off the first be returned to the borrower?
Well, you could always, this is a very unusual fact pattern here, and I would like to know more about the underlying situation. But just to strictly take his or her question at face value, you can always pay back the loan. There's nothing to stop you from paying back the loan. But I do want to take 1 second because I see that there is a question here about the 3509 and the 3510. Those are the forms that the SBA was using to take a much deeper dive on loans greater than $2 million. There was a series of questions and information asked, and the SBA announced this today that they are no longer going to be using these forms. So we're waiting to see whether or not that means that if you had applied before this and you didn't fill it out completely, can you stop answering the questions or not? But going forward, they've made the announcement that they're not going to be using the Form 3509. That's for for-profit companies, or 3510, not-for-profit companies.
And Robert, just to add to that, for those of you who are not keeping up on the numbers of the standard form, these are the loan necessity questionnaires, and they were taking a deeper dive into whether the company really needed the money. For all of the companies over $2 million, it was a long form, a long questionnaire where you had to explain exactly what your economic situation was. And we've filled out a lot of them, and we've come a long way. And this is just part of the ever-changing PPP that every time you wake up, the rules have changed. And so for all of those companies that had to go to that trouble, and submit all of that information, if they had just waited this long, they wouldn't have to do it. So, right, it's very good news for those of you with loans over $2 million. You'll no longer have to fill out that loan necessity questionnaire.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Can you confirm there are no loan amount limits precluding you from using the PPP Easy Loan Forgiveness app?
No, I think there is. I think there are some limits on the Easy. If that person just emails me the question directly, I'll get you the answer.
Okay.
Rather than
Thank you.
2 pages. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then next question. Does a self-employed borrower have to take payroll tax deductions on a weekly basis, or can the self-employed borrower just be paid a gross amount as a draw?
Self-employed individuals typically do not take payroll. They don't have to take it weekly, but they do have to take their draw within the 8 or 24-week covered period, and they don't withhold taxes against it. They would pay their taxes using quarterly estimates.
Thank you. And Robert, you mentioned decreasing wages by more than 25%. What time periods is that for?
It's during the covered period. That's the 8 to 24 weeks that the borrower can elect to use to calculate the amount of forgiveness eligibility.
Okay, 8 to 24, thank you. Next question. Our only employee, aside from the one owner, quit at the end of the covered period and moved out of state. Will we have an employee retention issue?
You might. Depends upon why they quit, if it was COVID related or not. And when they quit, did they quit 10 minutes after the covered period started, or did they quit on the 23rd week on Friday?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Next question. Are banks accepting applications for forgiveness for round 2 PPPs?
Yes. Yeah, it's this. Yes, the portals are open and have been opened. It's the same portal, whether it's round 1 or round 2.
Right,
So start doing your homework now, people. Get all your documents in order and get those, test your ERC credits and determine the right day to actually apply. But don't wait too long.
So I would just add to that the reason we're not seeing as many of the 21 loans asking for forgiveness yet is that, the rule is really that they have 10 months after their covered period ends. That's their deadline. And we were just making the point about having all the way up to maturity of the loan, that you can still ask for forgiveness. But if you go beyond the 10 months, you're going to have to start, paying the loan back and paying interest. So the 2021 loans, here we are, we're only in July, so they probably haven't run their covered period plus 10 months. That's why we're just not seeing those as much, but they certainly can start applying for loan forgiveness.
Right, and to add to that a little bit more, and I know we have people from the SBA, and please believe me, I have nothing but respect for everybody there, so I don't mean this in any way derogatory. The banks we're seeing that they're having difficulty processing these applications timely now. And when you get beyond the covered period, that's going to be a whole new set of steps for the banks and the SBA to implement. And judging from the difficulty that they're having with what has already been clearly defined, I think that you're going to see some difficulty on their parts as well if you go beyond the 10 months. Not that you can't do it, you can. Just be prepared for a bumpy road.
Thank you. All right, next question. What is the maximum time we can use for forgiveness, i.e. 2.5 months to...
The covered period is not, the 2.5 months is strictly a calculation when you determine how much money to borrow. The covered period, which is the period for the forgiveness, is between 8 and 24 weeks. And then you have 10 months after the end of the covered period to apply, and you can still apply up until the day the loan is completely paid off.
I just want to elaborate on that a little bit. The covered period is the time period in which the borrower has to use the funds. That's what the covered period is. So I just wanted to make sure.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. All right, next question. For owner employees of less than 5% ownership, does the $20,833 cap still apply to them?
No.
Okay. Thank you. And does the receipt of PPP round 2 restart the covered period and loan maturity for the forgiveness submission deadline?
Well, there are two different covered periods. You have a covered period for round 1, which starts from the day you get the money, and a covered period for round 2. It starts the day you got the round 2 money. So there are two different covered periods.
Okay. Thank you. And is it okay to overspend on my PPP loan in order to cover the reduction in FTE?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And that's what typically happens, because when you borrow the money, it was based on 2.5 months of payroll. And if you pick 24 weeks, that's obviously significantly longer than 2.5 months. So there's a lot of cushion built in. This extension of the covered period to 24 weeks was a gift to the taxpayers. It made it significantly easier to qualify for full forgiveness, even if you have some FTE reduction or wage reduction.
Well, I would say it was a gift to the borrowers.
Okay, true. Okay, better terminology.
Yeah, better term. The taxpayers are probably going to be paying for this for a long time. It was a really big gift to the borrowers.
Okay, I'm not going to get into the politics.
But they couldn't spend it. They really couldn't, 8 weeks. The reason they changed it was 8 weeks was just too short a period. It wasn't working for many companies to spend the funds in that period of time.
Okay, thank you. What if you don't use a payroll company to prepare payroll checks and merely have bank statements showing repetitive payments to an owner?
I'm not sure if the if they're implying in the question that there are no employees and it's only the owner, then the bank statements and canceled checks would suffice. But if there are employees, then you're going to have to submit all the documentation requested for in the slide that I prepared, which will include payroll tax returns. Somebody will have had to prepare payroll tax returns if you have employees.
Okay, thank you. All right, next question. If PPP forgiveness applications are submitted in the coming days, but the first payment date of the loan is approaching, in our specific case, August 1st, how do we handle that? So I imagine this might be a question better suited for our bank, but wanted to ask in case you have some general advice.
Well, today is July 13th. If your loan is scheduled for repayment on August 1st, and you get everything in that the bank would request, there is a reasonable chance that you will get forgiveness before your loan payments start. But if they don't grant the forgiveness until after the loan payments start, you're going to have to make that payment.
And I would just add, this is probably the biggest question for this entire webinar, that it just applies to everyone, that this is the reason you need to apply earlier than you might not be prioritizing this right now, but you need to get around to it earlier than you would think if this were a perfect process. But it's not, and the lenders are behind, and SBA is behind, and with all due respect to both the lenders and SBA, this was just an overwhelming, that's why I wanted to show you the numbers. We're talking about, 11 million companies. So you need to build in more time, because otherwise you're going to have to start paying back your loan. And that's clearly not even the congressional intent. And many of you are going to get full loan forgiveness. So why would you want to put yourself in that position? So build in more time than you think you'll need.
Good tip, thank you. We'll just take a couple more questions. So next question, does the forgiveness count as gross revenue in the calculation of the employee retention credit? So we received forgiveness in 2021 and would qualify for the ERC gross revenue test, except for the receipt of forgiveness in 2021. But the conditions were met in 2020. So if we could include in 2020, we would qualify for ERC for Q1 2021.
No, the forgiveness of debt, the forgiveness income does not come into play for the calculation of the ERC reduction of gross revenue.
Okay.
Which is why I have to be so careful in applying for forgiveness, is to make sure you maximize the ERC. You have to watch the interplay between these two different programs very carefully.
Okay, thank you. Okay, last question is a two-parter. So what do you do when you apply for a second loan and SmartBiz sits on it, denies it for more info, and will not tell you what they mean when they say denied for incomplete app?
It's funny, Tenley and I were just talking about the answer to this question yesterday. The SBA has announced yesterday that they intend to open up a portal for borrowers to make their loan forgiveness application directly. And one of the reasons that the SBA has stated in opening up this portal is that there are certain lenders who have either disappeared or who are unresponsive. And this would give the borrower another venue to get their forgiveness. So if your lender is unresponsive or has disappeared, you might be best suited waiting for the SBA to open up this portal, which is supposed to happen in the next couple of days.
Okay, perfect. I think that actually answers the second part to his question. So I'll take one more question. Let's see, is there a provision for those who waited a long time for round one approval to somehow get round two? We were not given time to spend round one.
Well, there was a provision for additional time, but that window is closed now. So the round two lending is closed.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for questions. For anyone who we didn't get to, we'll try to get to you after the webinar. We'll reach out. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Tenley. That was so informative. It was a pleasure to have you.
Great.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thanks everyone for joining.